Hello, friends. My name is Host Eric. I am the host of Talking with Famous People in the world's premier, foremost, and most correct typologist. Today, I've received an email from an INXP discussing about INXP stuff. You've typed me as INTP before. I was wondering if you think that INPs have a unique relation to their polar, being that it is something physically demanded for progression in one's life. Let me explain. With something like FI, one might be able to ignore it and find it quite mysterious, being that it is often avoided by many people as a topic of discussion when dealing on the surface. However, especially in post industrial society, SE is demanded of us and seen to be something of almost virtuous requisition. So for the SE polar, it is impossible to be unaware of our seventh function and find it mysterious. Not really the right word, perhaps abstract is more fitting. We must be aware of it in some sense and grow up trying to desperately avoid it, eventually working out some way to integrate it into our lives, or survive without giving it credence. I imagine other polar functions can be foreign to oneself, late into the 60s even. But an SE polar person is aware of it by at least age 15, given that we live in today's society. The line of thinking has sprung from my own relation to SE. I'm still putting things off eternally, but have found that my entire life boils down to whether I do the SE. My mental health depends on exercise and meditation, which for me are SE tasks that I must complete. I feel a sense of comfort when I enter the thrownness of task completion, or perhaps better said as task decision, as if my past is but a propeller moving me into the moment, not to be taken as anything but a reference to words and their literal meaning. This does not seem to be a way of relating to the polar function. Do you think it is normal to find such importance placed on the polar function? I don't expect you to get back to me, but it would be great if you did. Hope this reached you well. So much to say about this. So many things. Let's start at the top. Do INFPs, INXPs, INTPs have a unique relationship to their polar? Yes, in the sense that what he's getting at there is that some functions, introverted functions as a polar, are going to be less obvious to people than extroverted functions as a polar, because extroverted functions are how one behaves as a subject, which is to say, it's how one manifests your affect, your behaviors, and things other people can see and evaluate. So, if you have an introverted function polar, you're much more likely to go a long distance in life before anybody says there's something wrong with you about that specific thing. Now, it's most likely to occur with SI and TI, because those are the two functions that have the most role as a subject. In other words, hey, remember that time we went to meow is something that's me being an object getter, a question asker, demanding the other person be a subject and provide me the object that you should have at your disposal because we share this experience. Except they don't really remember it. Well, so they're going to hear at some point, you've got a terrible memory, and it maybe bugs some people, right? The other thing is, if you're TI polar, you're going to run afoul in school of things that require introverted thinking, and it's at some point going to be clear to you that there's something going on there that you're not good at. But you may not quite understand what it is. It's a little bit more complicated. You need more of a direct explanation from somebody like me as to what's wrong with you, quote unquote, than you do with SI polar, in which is easily expressed as you've got a terrible memory. Now, FI polar is least easily expressed. It's you can reduce it to something like you're a sociopath, or you really don't care about people, or something like that. But that would be much less fair of a thing to say about FI polar than, I guess you've got a terrible memory, or you're really bad at logic. In the sense that caring about people is much more complicated than either of those other two things, which are much more directly described as skills. So the thing is, it is the truth that I compartmentalize too well for most people's comfort. In other words, if something terrible's happened right now, I'm supposed to be fixated on that to the exclusion of my ability to have fun doing other things or to just lose myself in other processes. And so people will say, wow, he really doesn't care. This thing just happened and he really doesn't care. That's what it means to compartmentalize your emotions too well, I guess. And that's, again, me critiquing it by other people's perceptions. I recognize it myself when something that I think is very precious experiences harm because I failed to do adequate harm prevention. I've been lucky in life. That's happened a couple of times. I still have this anguish at my lack of harm prevention to the cat that was Capillo's mother when I tried to make the move to Laverne and failed to prevent her from getting lost and separated. Like she bolted and she never really learned her home, her new home, and she disappeared after a bit. So, and that was my fault, and I still feel guilty about it. I still feel terrible. And so it's like when the problem with being FI polar is when you fail to take care of something precious and it's destroyed or harmed or experiences damage, it's the kind of pain that sticks with you for a long time. Whereas when you can't figure out how to put the trash bag in the trash can, that's a little bit easier. So let's go on to this next section. However, in post-industrial society, SE is demanded of us and seen to be something of an almost virtuous requisition. Right. Well, I mean, very much so. Just do it is Nike's way of universalizing that SE value, right? Sports, in terms of how we talk about them, are all about SE values. Just win, baby. It's almost impossible to be unaware of your blind spot if you're an INTP or an INFP and find it mysterious because it's easily described as lacking self-discipline, procrastination problem, and executive function disorder it's going to be described as, and basically failure to launch, failure to fulfill potential. There are lots of ways to nutshell it that are more or less accurate from the perspective of a third party evaluating you as a subject. The thing is, INTPs and INFPs are maximally not subjects. They are object types. They don't operate in a frame of reference in which they are the subjects. So they're the ones that get information. They receive objects on purpose. They're an object broker in a way that a knower is not. A knower is an object canal. Either leads to a big warehouse where things are kept, or that I guess builds up the sets of eyes on the things going down the canal to make evaluations a bit more accurate, real time, and going forward and stuff. That would be the contrast between NI and that analogy. Okay, I don't want to get sidetracked. If you are SE polar, then you're going to encounter these specific critiques to yourself, that you are failing to fulfill your potential, that you are failing to launch, that you are not following through, that your eyes are bigger than your stomach, that you overcommit and underdeliver, that you procrastinate and put off stuff that you should just get out of the way, that you always struggle with the easy part. The hard part you don't seem to have any problem with. The easy part is getting it done. What's wrong? I mean, let me structure some TE plans for you. Yeah, I mean, the world's really messed up everybody in that it doesn't explain why certain parties are imposing frame mia on people and certain parties are imposing frame mia on people, and the fact that whether or not you get the right kind of frame imposed on you in the right ways, depending on which frames are native to you, that's going to make you okay and thrive or continually running into problems. Rachel, in an environment that allows Rachel to be Rachel, can be okay and thriving as a knowing type, except, accepted and valued for her variety of knowledge, which is the eyes on the canal variety rather than the warehouse variety, and which is also the oh no, what am I going to do with the trash can variety if the trash doesn't fit into the trash can? So it's like if the person who's dealing with her all the time is the opposite on both of those, which is to say they're the warehouse variety and they're the assumption that you can always there's always a way around what appears to be a problem by ordinating the object, learning things, etc. It's going to be a lot of conflict. So this is true for SE polar as well. No matter who you're with, whether or not there's conflict with that person or those people or that group or that situation depends on how aware the people are of who you are and how willing they are to use you for what you ought to be used for. Being an object type means INTPs especially, but INFPs I suspect as well, ultimately need somebody else to need them to maximize their potential, to maximally attain their potential for the common good. For INTPs, this is certainly the case. If there would just be somebody whose role it is to make sure that you are maximally attaining your potential because that's the thing that person can do best to impact everybody well. Well, that's ideally the role of the ESFJ with the INTP is to do precisely that, to not really have any ideas or intuition of their own and simply to say, hey everybody, let's all get excited about what this person's doing, and or let's find a way that your thing can be made into TE profit, SE profit, because they're SE6, so it's like when the world presents problems, they try to do something. They're FB Dom, so they're not really doing things without the frame of reference of this other person. And the INTP, who's FE fourth, is comfortable being mothered through things. Come on now, you've got to go to soccer practice, except with intelligent, interesting things like, you come on now, you've got to solve this vexing code problem. It takes a special person to play that role. It takes a smart INTP to set good boundaries with that role and manage that role well. As an ENTP who tried to pretend to be an INTP in that position with an ESFJ, it took me to be a serious drunk for that to sustain over years. And that's because being a drunk made me curtail all of my opinionatedness and excesses and stuff because I was always afraid that whoever was going to push back against what I was saying would just simply say, well, you're a worthless drunk, so suck on that. At which point I would just have to suck on that. So I just kept my mouth shut, Anyway, but I'm not anymore, so I'm able to blah, blah, blah all I want. The line of thinking has sprung from my own relation to SE. I still am putting things off eternally, but have found that my entire life boils down to whether I do the SE. My mental health depends on exercise and meditation, which are for me SE tasks that I must complete. I mean, those things are both SI more than they are SE. It's so SE polar to mistake exercise and meditation. I mean, the thing is, what he's not mistaking is the need to complete them being an SE matter. I feel a sense of comfort when I enter the thrownness of task completion. The thrownness of it. That's what a weird word, right?
Yeah.
Or perhaps better said as task decision. I think he might have meant thoroughness, like thoroughness, or thoroughness, completion, or something. But I don't know. I like thrownness anyway as a word there, as if my past is but a propeller moving me into the moment, not to be taken as anything but a reference to words and their literal meaning. I mean, the thing is, that's how SI and SE link, right? Is the SI Dom does SE like this. They don't do SE by paying attention to SE. They do SE by paying attention to SI all the time. Okay, and next I got to do this, and then I got to remember after I do this, I got to call Judy because Judy's waiting for that call, and I should make sure I respond to that email. And yeah, I need to check my math. And then they go and the thing that happens in between the memorable moments is the actual doing of the thing. It's just sort of not conscious about it. As I was saying the other day, I think the best definition of consciousness is how capable are you of remembering instances of it. So with the potato touch story, it's very clear I can remember instances of both knowing via intuition and knowing via SI. It's more difficult for me to articulate instances of SE meaningfully. And if the question is framed like this, can you recall a time when you should have taken physical action but spoke instead? And I can recall such a time, but I have to go. The first thing that comes to mind is back in college, there was this one girl I should have kissed, but I didn't. I was too scared and shy, and I talked instead. So I never did kiss her, and I can think of that being one instance where I should have done something and I talked instead. But it's hard for me to think of other instances of it, frankly. It's really hard. It's like, I'm sure it happens every day. Well, I mean, I guess I could say the other day when my dad came home, I should have. See, that's SI. I should have remembered to do those things instead of forgetting about it and talking. That's not the same thing as I should have done something, but instead I tried to talk out the problem. I can't think of any other instances really, except for that one time that I should have kissed that girl in college. But
Now you get to kiss me.
now I get to kiss Rachel. It's irrelevant now. I mean, remember Rachel for me. That was 32 years ago. So it's not really weighing too heavy on me. Okay. I'm not staying up nights still wishing I'd kissed that girl. It's just that's how far back I have to go to think of an example of a time when I should have done something, but I talked instead. It's always the opposite. I should have talked, but I did something. You know?
Yeah.
So presumably, if you're an INTP or INFP, in your 8th slot, you've got FI or TI. So it should be very difficult for you to distinguish between instances where you should have used your logic versus instances where you should have used your feelings to determine the statuses of a matter, if that theory about the 8th slot thing is correct. My basic hypothesis here is that the 8th slot function is the most unconscious, and that we can operationalize our definition of consciousness as an instance of attention that you can remember is an instance of an attention that was conscious. So I don't expect you to get back to me. Well, I've crushed your expectations. I've violated your prime directive. Now you're going to have to rework your map. Uh-oh. I've caused an ontological crisis in this particular INXP. But it would be great if you did. So he's allowed for the possibility that I would. So I guess instead he set the terms for a great expectation being met versus a shitty expectation being met. He's allowed himself for both. He expects both. He expects the shitty one, but he also secretly expects the good one, so that either way, his map will be right. You hope this reached me well. I don't know how well it reached me. I mean, it successfully reached me, but did it do a good job on its way and in the fashion in which it reached me? Well, I wasn't there for that part. I wasn't in the tubes of the internet watching it travel. Maybe it got stuck with some other emails in a clog for a little while. In which case, I would say no, it didn't reach me well. But what you really mean, of course, is that I'm well when it reached me. Because, and here's why it works. Because what part of speech is well in this sentence? It's funny. It's interesting. The part of speech is, it's an object complement. It's an adjective object complement. You might say, Eric Well's not an adjective. Yeah, it is. If I'm well, it is an adjective. So, in other words, it's describing, it's an, if the sentence I am well, well is a predicate adjective that describes the subject I by the equivalency am. In this case, it's saying this person hopes that this correspondence reaches me well. And the same sort of construction as he hopes that this man will paint the room pink. Same construction, object complement. A little understood part of speech in English, and a fairly rare construction, but also open to the hilarious misconstruction that I presented, which is that this person is suggesting that perhaps the journey of the correspondence had not gone smoothly, to which everyone laughed and laughed. So anyway, thanks for your correspondence, mister, and don't forget to eat plenty of peas. Changed it up on you.